Good evening, everyone. This is Shane Gebauer with BrushyMtnBeeFarm. I'd like to welcome you all this evening to Beekeepers as Citizen Scientists. Tonight, joining us, we've got Dr. Larry Connor with Wickwasp Press, also author of numerous books that are well touted and well respected in the industry and bought by many. And I'll give him a shameless plug. They're excellent reads. Topics such as increase essentials, bee sex essentials, hive essentials, etc. All kinds of great titles that you can check out at wickwasp.com or at BrushyMtnBeeFarm.com. Tonight, Larry is going to lead the discussion. Larry, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for helping out with this evening's webinar, and it's good to hear from you.
Thank you, Shane. I appreciate the chance to chat again. I think we skipped a year, didn't we? So I feel like I'm tardy and getting out to your folks. And I want to say, first of all, that I appreciate the number of people who have commented on this series of webinars that we've done over the last couple of years, and always in a very positive way. And I don't think anyone said anything, sent any hate mail. So that's always a good sign. Now, maybe you see that, Shane.
No. Generally, the comments are very positive, which we certainly appreciate.
I'm very pleased with that. This is a little bit different today. This isn't beekeeping per se, more about the whole area of beekeeping as it fits into a more global picture, I guess, but we'll get into that in just a second.
Yeah. Larry, now, just before we went live, we were talking about a couple of poll questions that you wanted to ask the audience, and I think now would probably be a good time to launch those polls before we get into tonight's topic, if you don't mind.
Excellent.
All right, so here I'm going to launch the first poll, and go ahead and just take a bit to respond to this. This is for our benefit here, so if you would, go ahead and choose which you prefer as a subject, sustainable beekeeping or bee biology. And I'm going to go ahead and close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll, and then I'll share the results of that. So sustainable beekeeping, hands down, Larry, is what people want, what they're interested in.
Wow.
So that's, I think, excellent information. Now, we have one more poll, which I'll launch quickly, and the question here is the same, but the options, your choices are different. So which is more interesting, the business side of beekeeping or creating value-added hive products? So go ahead and answer this one if you would. And yet again, I'll close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And just so everyone can see, split right down the middle, 50-50. So no deciding choice there. Thank you very much for taking the time to answer those. And Larry, hopefully that's useful information for you. And now I think we can get started with being citizen scientists.
Well, thank you, Shane. I just a word of explanation about this. I get a lot of suggestions from beekeepers and non-beekeepers about what subjects I should write about or I should publish a book about. And quite honestly, the list is now filling a large whiteboard in my office. So it's a little bit scary. And, you want to figure out where you want to put your resources. So let's talk about beekeepers as citizen scientists. And my first personal experience in being a citizen scientist probably goes back to my teens, excuse me, when I was in 4-H. And I had done the required insect collections and had identified a beetle as a Japanese beetle. And this is in Michigan, a number of years before Japanese beetles were officially in the state. They were coming. We knew they were coming. But the limited resources I had as a kid indicated, well, it's a green beetle, it's shiny, it's this, it's that. must be a Japanese beetle. And I didn't realize that I would be visited by both the Michigan Department of Agriculture and the USDA PHIS, the agency and the regulatory folks, because they were really interested in seeing my beetle. It turned out it's a look-alike that's a pest on pine trees, which of course we raised as kids. So that wasn't a surprise, but it was an interesting experience in how we all deal with science in different ways. Well, this phraseology, citizen scientist, is relatively new to me. It's also called crowd science, crowdsourced science, civic science, or network science. So there you are. But the key is this is all done by amateurs. It's done by non-professional scientists. And the phrases just went into the Oxford Dictionary this June. So one of the better definitions that I've come up with this is anyone who voluntarily contributes his or her time and resources toward scientific research in partnership with professional scientists. And I think this is important to me, that this science be done as a relationship with established individuals who actually do study science, and not just sort of the run-of-the-mill contribution to the amount of information that we're flooded with TV and cable TV and the internet and everything else, that we actually have the opportunity to work with some of these individuals. Now, while the term may be new, the practice is not. Certainly, we had gentlemen scientists with Isaac Newton, Benjamin Franklin, Charles Darwin, and many, many, many others who were not trained as scientists per se. Quite often they had very different backgrounds, but they became interested in science. Darwin, of course, traveling around the world and studying all kinds of organisms. It was there for him to put all this information together. The ladies were a little less likely to get their work published, unfortunately, but if you look at some of the eras from, say, the 1700s and on, extensive drawings, watercolors, and observations on all kinds of things in nature, birds, insects, wildflowers, landscapes, and so forth. So this is all something that many, many people have been interested in. Now, I have a brother that has been going to the annual Audubon Society Christmas bird count every year around the 28th of December. It's an opportunity to go out and sip some hot liquid beverages with some like-minded adults and maybe some kids. Drapes around the countryside. He lives in Idaho, so it's a pretty interesting country. And look at the bird species they see. And, of course, he's been doing this long enough. He can probably recognize the bird species by its song or just hearing it scratch in the woods. Astronomers have also had a strong involvement with citizen scientists, with science, because as individuals with a telescope and as technology improved, early comets and other phenomena have been observed by people who were not at a big-name observatory. They were doing it on their own. So there is a long history here. Now, in entomology, we've had a couple of things that are going on in the last couple of years. One is the Lost Ladybug Project, which was a combination of the Cornell University and the 4-H Master Gardener Program. And as of their website this afternoon, they're up to 28,000 ladybugs that have been counted, including a rare 9-spotted ladybug. And, of course, the value of this is to watch the ladybugs, just like any other animal, and watch their populations, what species are here now that weren't here, and what species in particular that are no longer with us that we've seen in the past. Most of us are familiar with the work that the Monarch people have been doing. This has gotten a lot of publicity, and a lot of the work that's being done here is done by non-scientists. And so the University of, I believe, Kansas has a whole program called the Monarch Watch, where you can get information about how to tag and mark and release these things. And there's, sample Excel spreadsheets for you to write observations on and release instructions, a little coaching, and a lot of detail. So it's the sort of thing that sort of inspires me. Then we've had urban programs pop up all over the country, and here's one, the Sunflower Plus project, that is taking urban landscapes and planting an alternating crop of sunflowers in winter wheat. So that vacant field that goes to weeds or is just, a low-grade lawn could actually be producing something useful, both to the bees. This isn't science for much as it is social activism, but it still works. More science-related is the Great Sunflower Project. And this is a program, I believe it's still underway. I couldn't find anything today to indicate that it was in operation this year. And maybe somebody out there knows this. And you basically get a whole set of people, thousands of people, to watch sunflowers in bloom. Most of us have just seen that in the last couple of weeks. And go out there and watch the sunflower head for 5 minutes and record the number of key bee species. So honeybees, bumblebees, green bees, and I think there was another category. And this is just a very simple way of getting overall national trends and how some of these things are working. So how does this all fit with beekeeping? We had relatively few bee scientists in the United States. They were usually entomologists who worked with bees. And as the beekeeping industry evolved after Langstroth, and I should have his name on this list, people like Root, Miller, Doolittle, Dadant, and many, many others were not really trained as scientists. Miller was an MD, and you just had a wide range of backgrounds. Langstroth, of course, was a minister. And so they are socializing with each other through the bee journals that started, and also at beekeepers' meetings. And in many ways, bee meetings 120-some years ago were better attended and a lot harder to get to than some that we have now, although we've seen quite a resurgence of that. I just wanted to point out a woman who's been very, very important in bringing forth this citizen scientist. It was Anna Comstock, and there's a Comstock Hall at Cornell University. She was married to an entomologist, John Henry Comstock, and he encouraged her to illustrate his lectures and his publications. And she'd sit at the microscope and do the drawing. She'd look at something and draw it. And I think it's important here that she be noted that she did do a textbook on how to keep bees, and that was in 1905. So here is one of the very first bee manuals for the small new beekeeper, and it was written by a woman. So I think we can applaud that. Now in beekeeping right now, we have a number of things that are going on. One is the Bee Informed Partnership, which involves a number of universities and is based out of Maryland now. And here you can read this comment about their focus and so forth. And there's the website, beinformed.org, that you can write down and contact them if you're interested in anything there. What I think is really useful with this particular program is the fact that it does now have a survey component, two survey components, if you will. One is the annual survey that many of us have filled out to say how well our bees have or have not done in the previous 12 months. And that whole massive data has been really useful to trend the colony collapse disorder and nosema and other issues that we've got. It also helps us see where some other problems have popped up with queens and everything else. So that's one aspect, is the general survey. But the other one is the people who are participating and taking, I believe, monthly samples of their bees and submitting them to the program, having them analyzed for a number of diseases and issues. And this providing us, well, provides the individual with feedback, but in the citizen science component, it provides the industry with information of what's going on out there in a fairly timely basis. So this stuff is out there in a matter of days or weeks rather than months or years. which is quite often what happens when you have, the overworked professor goes out and makes a few observations, and it takes a while for that person to analyze it.
Larry, I just want to interject that just last week we had Karen and Dennis from the Bee Informed Partnership give us a webinar on
Excellent.
interpreting some of the results and the data from that those results have come, and that's now posted up to our YouTube channel, and it was excellent to hear the fruits of their labors.
Yeah, that's good, and this is exactly what this whole concept is about. This is the part where they're actually getting sample information from the beekeepers, right?
That and also the management survey.
The management survey, okay. When I was a grad student with Dr. Burt Martin at Michigan State, one of the things that happened at least weekly, maybe twice a week, was we had to go out to the apiary, and there was a big old grain scale sitting on a platform with a beehive on it, and we'd record the weight of that hive. So I was very early on, I was impressed with the changes a colony would go through during the winter with weight loss as it eats and consumes honey, but also very impressed with how quickly a colony would gain weight during a nectar flow, maybe 20 pounds in a day or two, and then see the number drop overnight as they evaporate that moisture out to have the final honey product. So Bee Informed Partnership and other groups are now actively using these scales, but they're electronic now, and some of them use cell phone technology to relay that information. And I'm pretty excited about that option, because now we could have a global look at what's going on, and certainly area-wide. And one of the things that intrigues me here is that, you get beekeepers getting together and they talk about how well their bees are doing, but they don't have any good way of quantifying that and say, okay, my bees, gained 10 pounds or whatever it is. So this is a mechanism that you can use that gives you some numbers, and you can, for those of us who love charts and graphs, and some of us hate it, some of us love it, it's a way of looking at this over a wider area. There are some other programs in the U.S. There's also a number of European programs that are out there, other than the BIP program. I really like the idea that beekeepers can be actively involved, and not necessarily in a terribly time-consuming way, but having some fun with it. Well, we also have things like the zombie bee, the phorid, that is a parasite. You can see this here on this image I took off their website. And it's a way of reporting, if you see this particular fly, which is a parasite in the adult bee, that you can report that to this website. It's a way of doing two things. It's a way of monitoring the spread of this and the distribution of this phorid, and it's also an excellent way of collecting a larger scale, a set of data than you'd ever get from a single person going out and sampling themselves. So this is a very cool thing, I think, to work on. Now, I've put together a short list, and I'm sure that the people that are on the other end of this webinar have some excellent suggestions, and I'm eager to hear them. One is this whole concept of mating saturation, and we need to have more citizen scientists who are actively involved in the concept of saturating an area with desirable drones. I call them target drones, and depending on what you're doing, if you're using survivor stock or whatever it is, more and more people are going to localize stocks, especially after that publication in the International Bee Research Association publication that indicated that in Europe that local bees always did better than exotic bees from another lab, and they swapped queens from, I think, 14 or 15 different countries, bee labs, research labs, and it was interesting that in every case the local bees did better than the so-called exotic bees from out of state, out of country, And I think that that's something that many beekeepers need to learn from. Now, there's a conflict there in that people like myself, and in some of my books, I recommend that you buy breeder queens from people that have selected for a varroa mite resistance and any other good benefit, that you can find. So these seem to be at odds with each other, and I think we really have to do some hard work here trying to figure out how to incorporate good genetic information into our bees and not lose that local advantage that bees clearly have now. So if you ever looked at people, and I'm sure that Dennis and others have shown this, that the bees that have come from local sources quite often do quite well on these surveys, and the people who never buy somebody else's queens but always use their own has a real advantage. Now, the last couple of months I've been working with Nicole and Gundrid Kerniger from Germany. They're now retired. And Jamie Ellis from University of Florida has been helping on this. And we've got a new book coming out on the mating of queen bees, bees. And it's been a real eye-opener for me to see how much information is out there and how little beekeepers tend to know about how to get good mating control. This particular image that I've got up here now is producing drones and saturating drones in a particular area. They reflect that in that they did some studies and found that a queen goes out, and some of you already know this, a queen goes out from the hive. She flies a considerable distance, about a mile, to a drone congregation area. The local drones from a particular bee yard, your bee yard, stay local. They don't fly very far. And they do a beautiful job of explaining that for a hive to load up a young queen, a virgin queen, and send her out a mile away requires a certain amount of honey. But to load up, let's say 300 to 500 drones per colony, and all your bees in the bee yard are doing the same thing, they say that it takes about 10,000 drones to maintain a DCA, a drone congregation area, and that requires about 15,000 drones total, because about a third of them are going back and forth for refueling, and they're out there on an average of about 25 minutes in a mating searching behavior, looking for young queens, and then they run on empty, and they have to go back to the hive. So 3 or 4 times every day when the weather is right, these drones are going out. But so you can imagine just how much honey a colony would use supporting those drones if they flew a mile, each drone flew a mile out and a mile back. And then, of course, how little time that drone would have in the actual DCA. The other thing that's very interesting is that drones are out there patrolling, and very few of them mate. But the queen, of course, gets out there, and she has plenty of suitors, and her mating, the total process of mating with the drone is about 2 seconds. So it doesn't take her very long to get the job done, even when she mates with multiple drones, which, of course, they do. And then she can go back and never fly again unless she happens to go with a swarm. It's interesting to me that this is a really risky adaptation that honeybees have, because here's a colony, and you're sending out your most valuable individual, the young queen, to mate a mile away without, any guarantee that she's ever going to come back, because there are dragonflies and birds and, weather fronts and all kinds of things that may interfere with this. And she can come back, and she may not. And they say about 25% of our queens are lost because they can't make it back. So now when you're checking your hives, or if you've just checked them, getting ready for winter, you find a colony that's completely queenless. Well, that may be what happened. They've gone through that queen replacement process. So I would like to see more clubs focus on more studies on saturating an area for mating in their clubs, or individuals doing it as well. Related to that, of course, is a concept of stock comparison and sources of queens. And many of you have heard about this work that the beekeepers in northern Virginia have done and throughout Virginia. And for 7 or 8 years now, I believe, they've been tracking and surveying the performance of colonies, and they've compared whether these bees have come from packaged bees, if they're queens from the south, queens from the north, local bees, and so forth. And of course, they have found that the local bees and the local queens have done the best. That's changing the way they keep bees in that part of the country because they're putting a greater emphasis on producing nucleus colonies. And going with that, then, they're developing a strong mentoring program, so every new beekeeper has a mentor. And the ideal model is that they then get their nuke from their mentor, perhaps for a fee, probably for a fee, rather than going somewhere else. I think it's of interest that the Russian bee program, this program that Tom Render at USDA in Baton Rouge has developed, is now in the hands of beekeepers. And that the program is set up so that the beekeeper is now running the selection program, and the queens they produce are tested by USDA in Baton Rouge to see if they've maintained this Russian genetic component. But it's exciting to me to see more and more of this hands-on beekeeping going on, where the actual selection is in the hands of the beekeepers. Greg Hunt at Purdue has been working now for several years, and this last season, groups of beekeepers from Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia, Illinois, and I hope soon Michigan have been expanding the use of his selection work on what people call the bite the mite, or a grooming behavior bees have to actually put holes in the carapace, the shell, or tear the legs off of varroa mites, give them a really bad day. And many of you have heard or met or had a chance to read about Judge Dan O'Hanlon, who's a retired West Virginia judge, Dwight Wells, who's been very active in western Ohio in terms of trying to get more beekeepers to raise queens and actively test their stock for this grooming behavior. And they've pointed out one thing that's very important here. Without constant testing and selection, you lose the trait. You've got to keep it up there. So this is where having a large number of beekeepers would really be of benefit. Pat Bono, who I think her largest organizational activity prior to this was keeping a group of Girl Scouts in line, has developed this New York Bee Wellness Program. I've been involved with that now for a couple of years, as have people like the tech transfer team at Guelph and Dinah Cemetero and several others. The wellness program is really focusing on teaching local beekeepers how to recognize bee diseases, bee mites, evaluate, determine threshold levels, and take some actual measurements. So here's just a map of the state of New York. But now this is now a 501(c) corporation, as I recall, and it's set up so it's going to be sustaining itself through grants and fees and teaching opportunities. And why is this so important? It was because New York, and of course Michigan for many years, and other states don't have apiary inspection programs anymore. And so the burden is shifted to the beekeeper to maintain this. So why we want to have this is that we have, there used to be, if you had American foul brood, it was a badge of shame. You couldn't tell anybody about it. Now it's a matter of, we need to know where this is, we need to manage it, and not have a problem anymore. With the varroa mites, of course, we're getting much better local data on what these economic thresholds are. So if you do a sugar shake with 300 bees and you end up with 6 mites in that sugar shake, do you treat or don't you treat? And they're getting much better information as to the result of doing this. We have a number of programs that deal with non-apis, and the Xerxes Society has been active in this, of course. Penn State with their Pennsylvania Native Bee Survey, which is, you put a state's name on there and it immediately is going to go global on you. And this happened to be money from Haagen-Dazs that they were used to put this up. Dennis was involved in this as well. So I suggest you all take a look at this, write this down to helpthehoneybees.com and look at this. This is just a really good manual for recognizing pollinators, different situations, pollinator behavior. And if you think you know something about bee behavior, when you get into these non-apis species, it gets pretty exciting and maybe a little bit confusing. So there we are. How about you? What ideas and programs can you add to this? So Shane, if we can get any kind of feedback or comments now, I'd kind of like to go into a conversation mode here. I've spent 30 minutes or so talking about my thoughts, and I'd like to know what people are thinking. I've also got a pen and paper here, so beware. I might write or do something about it sometime in the future. How's that sound?
That sounds good. You know, this is something that I have a great deal of interest in because it's largely beekeepers coming together to share their knowledge, and that's one of the reasons why I'm really interested and excited about the Bee Informed partnership, and I've been involved with that because that's what it is it's beekeepers providing the information, and their whole premise is that the beekeepers have the answers. It's just that all the information is held by each individual beekeeper, and thus we need to sort of consolidate it. And it's working. But the problem is that each year I'm somewhat discouraged by the lack of participation in that. And I don't think that it's due to lack of knowledge about
You're talking about lack of participation in the survey?
In the surveys, yeah. I mean, when you look at the number of beekeepers there are in the United States versus the number that actually complete those surveys, it's really kind of disappointing to me. And so the question that I've got, and I'm not sure we can come up with an answer, but it's worth discussing, is one, how do we sort of motivate people to be involved in some of these things? Like some of the things you outlined here this evening are fantastic. The drone saturation, looking at locally raised queens, the bite the mite. These are all excellent, excellent ideas and initiatives that just about every bee association should be taking up, but yet they're not. And so how do we do that?
I pointed out in that one slide about Pat Bono. Here's an individual in New York State who's taken it upon herself to set this thing up, and she doesn't take a salary. I don't even think she puts in for much of her expenses. She's doing that here because of her love of bees. And not everybody's in a situation where they can do that, of course. But we do have, I think, with beekeepers, a very motivated group of people. But I share your frustration, is that instead of, I don't know how many thousand they get in the survey, maybe 6,000, is it?
It's thereabouts, yeah.
That there should be 60,000 beekeepers responding to this, because when you divide that out into 50 states and the District of Columbia, and you do the math on these, some areas are probably only being reported by one or two individuals, and that's just not going to be good information. It's just not complete enough. Now, I don't know what people have for ideas on how to motivate. I know that, was it 2 years ago or was it this year, that they had to delay the submission of data because, quite frankly, people hadn't been able to get out to the bee yard because they still had snow blocking them from getting to their bees. So some of these things are, what do you call it, procedural. And you need to work out the details on that. I also think that we need to do a really good job of educating beekeepers on what some of these things mean, because not everybody's on the same page. For when you ask the same question, people have different ideas of what you're talking about, and I'm sure you see that as I do.
Yeah, there's lots of lots of varying opinions out there, but I think again this is something for local associations to take up, that they should be engaging with their membership and offering these sorts of education opportunities. That mentoring programs should be sort of a matter of course with all associations. There's a tremendous surge of new beekeepers coming to the industry and tremendous interest in the honeybee. and keeping bees, and we're not doing anyone any favors if we're not doing all we can to help these new beekeepers. We know as an industry we're struggling, and we know that there are challenges. We need to band together, I think, to help each other so that we're all more successful. If I've got a really awful beekeeper down the road from me and that's just loaded up with diseases and mites and foul brood and you name it, that's not going to do me any favors or my colonies any favors. So we need to try and help sort of raise the level of beekeeping nationwide, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, you know, I don't know where the internet and the electronic contributions come into play here. I think there's a way, perhaps, of getting some of these technologies implemented better than what we already have. We've got a few things going on with monitoring systems, but, you know, the classic question of who's got bees near me. Mm-hmm. You know, and you get into all kinds of legal ramifications. Well, you have no right to know whether I have bees or not. Are you from the government to tax me? Are you here to monitor my diseases? I mean, those are legitimate concerns people have. I'm not saying they're not. On the other hand, if I'm a new beekeeper and I want to know, gee, should I put bees there? Well, who's out there? A more appropriate thing is that, do I want to put bees in this particular location because it doesn't have a history in the past of pesticide exposure or American fall brood or really rotten honey crops? Those are three things I can think of at the top of my head that I'd like to know as a new beekeeper. And when you're just trying to keep your bees alive and keep them going, it's daunting when you have to say, okay, just how much information do you really have to learn the first day, first year, the first hive? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Well, so if associations were to sort of take up a cause of trying to consolidate information, trying to collect information just from their membership in hopes of understanding a little bit better what's going on just within their local environment, what do you think they should look at? What do you think, what bits of data should people, those members, be collecting that would have the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak? If you could pick, say, 5 parameters or 5 things to count or assess or whatever you want to say, would it be, you know, varroa count? Would it be mortality? What would you ask those associations to look at and start collecting?
All right, I'm going to use some of the bee wellness ideas. So the first thing I'm going to put on this list is you sample your bees. And the reason I say that is I want people to be able to first know how to sample. And, of course, most of the time when we say sample your bees, we're talking about varroa. But we could also be talking about nosema. And varroa sampling, we use the powdered sugar system. You can use ether or radiator fluid or whatever you want to use with about a half a cup of bees shaken in a container. With the powdered sugar, you add about 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar, shake the bees, and then you have a piece of screen that's on the container. Shake the mites off the bees onto a piece of paper, mix it with some water, and count the mites. What this is a very simple way of getting an idea of how many mites are in the hive. And you take this sample from bees that are in the brood nest because those are the most attractive bees to the mites. You wouldn't go into a colony and take bees off the inner cover or the honey super because those are going to be older bees and the mites don't find them quite as tasty. I think that's probably correct. So here's one system. Now, for a club to get involved, you know, everyone says, okay, we're going to sample over the next 5 days. And so this is our sampling window for October. Well, maybe you want to do it earlier in the season. I would. So we're going to sample in May. And you got 5 days, May 1st to 5th. And you want to get out to your beehives and sample this. And you don't have to do each hive, but you do several, and you can work with a statistician if you wanted to figure out the right way to sample it. But just the more people you get out there sampling, the better off you're going to be. And share the data. Share the data with each other. And keep separate the fact whether or not these colonies you're sampling are new colonies from nukes or packages, or if they're overwintered colonies, because there's going to be a difference in the number of bees in there. And this may have a lot to do with the bee population, the mite population that's there. I know a number of years ago, I'll tell you exactly, it was 1973. It was my first trip to Europe. And I went to several countries, and I was impressed when I got to England. The number of beekeepers that had microscopes, quite often sitting on their coffee table, and they routinely checked their bees for diseases, and especially for tracheal mites. They called it, of course, acrid mites at that time. And I had never seen a U.S. beekeeper do that. I'm sure there were some, but I'm just saying is that my experience was, it was a bit of a shock to see this involvement there. And so here's a sort of a corollary of this. If you're going to sample for mites and you're going to sample for nosema, then you can say, okay, we need to have a microscope class for our club. We need to have a training program so we can educate people on how to do these things. And, not just a show and tell, but a hands-on, and borrow the local high school biology lab, whatever it takes to get this training and get somebody in there who can train you. Ask that biology teacher, pay him to do the instruction. So you now have somebody who you can go to for feedback if you've got a problem, and get as many people as you can actively involved in this. And microscope work is not complicated. It does require a little bit of instruction. And I think most biology is taught in the 10th or 11th grade in this country, so these are kids. And maybe they're the best ones to do this, but it's really something I'd like to see is more microscope training. And you can take photographs with your cell phone now of what you see through the microscope. So it's pretty exciting. So there's one aspect. So sampling is a big thing with the derivative part of the microscope. So number two, what would be number two? Number two would be what kind of bees do you have? And that goes into two categories. One is the genetic background. In other words, you have local bees. Do you have something that you got out of from another beekeeper who's been raising queens from local stock? Or do you have something that's been brought in from California or Florida or Georgia? And I'm not saying that this is bad or good. I'm just saying you need to find out what's working in your area. And that would be a survey type thing you can do with your people, and look for things like queen success or failure. I'm pausing here to write this down for myself because, one of the things that I think most new beekeepers experience is a loss of queens. And a lot of these queens are lost for a variety of reasons, poor mating being one of them. But also, I think we have more and more information on the queens are perhaps being exposed during shipment to hot, warm, they're overheated. Or is it mismanagement by the beekeepers? Have they kept the bees in an unsafe, inappropriate way? I hear horror stories on a regular basis, and I know you do too, Shane, of what beekeepers do to their queens. So packages, and maybe we need to have sort of a guideline of how would you set up a little questionnaire that you ask, and does this information become public knowledge? Do I know what you've got in your beehive, Shane, or do you know what's in mine, or is this sort of anonymous submission of data? Those are things you're going to have to work out.
Well, that's an interesting point right there, because there are a couple comments that have come in that sort of suggest that that may be one of the reasons why the respondents to the BIP survey, for example, aren't higher than what they could be, because there's sort of that sense of admission of failure or wanting to be secretive about their bees and honey harvest and disease levels, etc. And that somehow, even though the BIP survey is completely anonymous, they don't collect personal information.
That's right.
And it's they actually, the people that handle that data had to go through the same training that doctors go through in handling personal medical information, which is kind of interesting. So it's handled in a very professional, very anonymous way, but there's still that sense of disclosing it, that uncomfortableness with disclosing it. And so it may be even more of an issue if you're at a more intimate level of a bee association where your frequent members are only 30 or 40 in number.
I think some of the people that are listening to this probably are old enough that they go back a few decades in their beekeeping to know that there was a time when you'd walk into a bee meeting, and if you asked somebody a question that borderline on being somewhat personal about their bees, if you got any answer, you knew pretty well it was going to be a lie. And it scared me when I was a graduate student to say, did these people ever tell the truth? Do they ever share what's actually going on? Now, this last winter, I had 4 colonies survive out of 40. A lot of them were nukes, so, you know, some people say I deserved that. But, you know, it was a really long, difficult winter here in Michigan. Those 4 that survived were amazing. And so, you know, you say, okay, well, now we've got something to build a breeding program from, maybe. We'll see what this next winter brings us. And that's always the thing about beekeeping. But, you know, it's difficult for beekeepers to admit that they've lost colonies. Mm-hmm. It's difficult for them to admit that they've had American foul brood. I'd be curious to know how many people out there in this group have had this ick brood or crud, or I think Dennis calls it idiopathic brood disease syndrome. And half the samples that we've sent off, that people I know here in Michigan that have sent it off, it comes back as European foul brood. And the other half, in the same bee yard, same conditions, comes back as negative. So what is it? And you know, this is something that I think it's going to take the citizen scientist component. Beekeepers should try to figure out what's really going on here and try to, you know, debug this.
Well, I've seen some of that in the colonies here at the business and also at my house. Now, I haven't gone to the point of sending the samples off, but what I've seen is, and we're going off a little bit on a tangent, it didn't quite fit what I would have expected for European foul brood, but it had a lot of the similarities.
Exactly, yeah. And yet, in Ohio and Indiana, the state bee inspectors there, I think I've got this right, are both recommending treatment with terramycin, and it seems to be working. So, you know, what's that all about? Trying to come up with 5 things. One that, number 3 here on this list, and we're just making this up, folks, so I'm just coming up with a 3rd one, and that's this whole area of breeding and selection. You know, that's kind of goes back to number 2, what kind of bees do you have? But I think that's a focus that would benefit a lot of beekeepers. So they say, well, I've had really good luck with X, Y, or Z. And so that might be a place for especially new beekeepers to start, to get your nucleus colony with local bees from X, Y, or Z, rather than that package from the fly-by-night. That's not right. I mean, packaged bee people work hard. Yeah, and I got a lot of good friends that produce packaged bees, and they're just as baffled as anybody as to why sometimes when they get into my bee yard, they just don't do well. So, anyway, I'm going to let the group out there give me a number 4 and number 5, because I'm scratching bottom here. I got a lot of things I would suggest, but I want to hear what they say.
Well, there's a couple comments here that I might sort of put into put my own spin on, if I can take some liberties. You know, when we think about the troubles that we're having with hive loss, the three factors that seem to rise to the top as leading contributors to colony loss are nutrition is one, pesticides is another, and diseases and pests. And I think you've already touched on diseases and pests with, you know, your mention of sampling, that you've got to do sampling. And so I think we can look at those other two then, the nutrition aspect and the pesticide aspect. Now, it's sort of difficult to get an assessment of pesticides, but as I was sitting here, and as you mentioned earlier, sort of knowing what's in the landscape around you, and I'm sitting here, and I spent a lot of time on Google today looking at the satellite view. I mean, the resources we've got available to us now are tremendous. You can put a circle, a 2-mile radius over your apiary, and rather easily do a quick and dirty assessment of what percentage of that area is in agriculture. You know, you can see fields. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that those fields are being sprayed with pesticides, but I think we could do some down and dirty. And let's face it, a lot of, you know, sort of citizen scientists data is sort of down and dirty, but it's useful when you start combining it with larger data sets. But you can do a down and dirty assessment of what percentage of that 2-mile radius is agricultural versus not, and you can begin to see some correlations perhaps amongst your bee association when you've got members scattered throughout counties or states, and say, okay, well, now we know how many colonies are being lost and what percentage of agriculture is in that area where those colonies are being lost. That could be some useful information. And then you've also touched on, Larry, sort of the hive scale, the weight aspect of things, which gets at the nutritional aspect a bit, right? We can see what kind of nectar flows are happening and whether they've got adequate honey stores. Now, of course, protein sources are equally as important when you talk about nutrition, and a hive scale may not necessarily be able to detect gains in pollen and discern between pollen and honey, but it still does provide some really good information about the nutritional condition of your hive. And I think that's something that people often overlook. You know, I give last year as an example where we just had a terrible spring, and so colonies were malnourished in this area in North Carolina in June, which is sort of unheard of after a spring flow, but they couldn't really get to it. And so that has long-lasting implications for the overall colony health going into July, August, and then thus into winter. And so I would throw those two things in there as sort of 4 and 5, and there's also some comments and / questions coming in that also point in that direction. So looking at pesticides, maybe at the sort of the landscape land use within your area, and then looking at nutrition through means of either quantifying somehow by, you know, you can do crude assessments of, you know, percentage of frames that have honey and how full they are to get an assessment of honey in the hive, or a hive scale. And it doesn't have to be a fancy electronic one, although they are quite nice. But you can use other methods. When we had Kim Flottam on here a month or so ago, he talked about using just a scale that you hook to the front, get a weight, hook to the back, get a weight, and add the two up, and you've got a fairly accurate hive weight based on the sum of those. So you can do things like that.
One of the things, by the way, I've just flipped through some pictures of our WICWAS titles. We brought back the Pollinator Protection book because several people were asking for it. It was a book that's been out of print for a number of years because of this whole focus on pesticides and bees. This is not a revision. This is the original book that Carl Johansson and Dan Mayer did many years ago. But it's actually more data than we've got anywhere else that people are using. And that's one of the conundrums we have. We just don't know enough about pesticides and bees. And this whole CCD and colony health issue. The nutrition is such an important part as well. You're right on that. One of the things that would be great if we could figure out how to set up pollen traps and sample, the pollen and pick out the most dominant pollen that comes into our hives on a weekly basis or some other interval, and identifying that pollen. And that requires some training and microscope work. But instead of identifying every pollen grain, we want to identify the dominant ones and see what's going on. Somewhere on my bookshelf is a master's thesis from a friend of mine at Michigan State, Dr. Larry Olson. And he looked at pollen analysis in Michigan in 4 different locations. And it was surprising how corn became the major food of honeybees. Now, this is a monocot. It's a grass. This is not what bees are supposed to be eating, but that's what they had available to them because that's what was available in nature. So these are the kinds of observations that I think that people can start making. And of course, pesticides and nutrition, do healthy colonies outgrow pesticide issues? And that's always been a strategy of commercial beekeepers. That if you had a pesticide problem, a minor one, you just kept the feed on to keep the colonies going. So those are the kinds of things that I think a local club can do. I jotted down here one other idea, and that's because people have been doing it. Bee clubs have been doing it, getting SARE grants and other grants to do actual research. And again, this is citizen scientists research. This is not work by scientists. They, I believe, have to be in, someone consult with them on the work. But the actual observations are made by the individuals. And so nutrition, wintering, pesticide experiences, these are things that could be addressed through some sort of monitoring program, comparison testing. Now back to the nutrition, one of the things that I made up pollen patties when I was a graduate student, and when we ran that Queen program for day dance back in the 1970s in Florida, we fed a lot of protein. And if we didn't get drones. And if we didn't get drones, we didn't get queens mated. So nutrition is something that is sort of a blanket that hits everything. And I think, I appreciate these comments that this is probably a very important thing that we focus on.
Yeah, there's a big debate. I actually gave a talk back in September, and the debate was, or I guess the comment that someone made to me was, well, if you have to feed, you're a bad beekeeper. And I challenge that because I don't think that's true. But it does raise the question, and the question's being raised here through comments, the nutritional value of our supplements versus the real thing, and what implications that may have. And that certainly goes back to what we've just talked about, which is sort of the overall nutritional issue.
I'll respond to your scenario. Lazy bees syndrome. Beekeepers say that you feed bees, you make them lazy. And I know of no other area of agriculture where if you have an animal, you don't feed it. And I'll get a little personal here. You're going to put your dog out and make it go out and find its food, or you're going to feed it? And I think this is something we have to kind of put in perspective, especially with a modern perspective and urban beekeeping and all the other things that's going on out there. We do have to really be focusing on what does it take to be successful. And back to that survey questions about being a sustainable beekeeper. You said hands down on that. I get that in quotes here, that people wanted something on sustainable beekeeping. Nutrition is a big part of sustainable beekeeping, that you have to monitor your nutrition. And you can have combs filled with pollen, but if it all came from Bahia grass with 3% protein, it may not be very useful to the bees, or ragweed, or corn, or any other of these low-protein pollens. So we need to put an integrated approach here so we have a better an idea. And doing it on a local basis would just be wonderful. But how you do this, you know, anybody got any answers out there? I don't know. I'm going to get my commercial in here.
Get your commercial in. We're at the top of the hour, so get your plug in.
So I was surprised when we looked at the numbers. Queen Ring Essentials is my #1 selling book. So I want to thank everybody that's read this book and used it in their classes. #2 is Dewey's book on that we came out with recently, a year ago, Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping. This has just been a very, very popular book. We're selling a lot to universities and a lot to bee clubs, and many individuals are getting it, and first-year beekeepers. And we did a revision of Increased Essentials, and by golly, it continues to sell really well. I'm pleased with that. And we've had good response to it. We try to add some new material. Bee Essentials with Rob Muir. Rob Muir is my business partner. And we came up, this is our beginner book, and can't afford Dewey's book. This is one we recommend. Steve Rapaski and I did Swarm Essentials last year, and earlier this year, I guess it was. I can't remember. These things kind of all blur together after a while. A lot of people worried about swarms, concerned about swarms, and this is sort of a comprehensive issue. See that sustainability thing? You know, get that in there. This is the new one. This is the one we just came out with, and I didn't write this one. This is not Dr. Peter Littner, who's a gardener, photographer, and beekeeper in Delaware, and Dr. Debbie Delaney encouraged him to submit this to me. It's a beautiful book. It's 400 pages, hardcover, and it's just a really delightful book. And it isn't a book about honey plants. It's a book about what you can tell your neighbors to plant in their garden that honeybees will visit. It's two different things. And, you know, you want to have something that's pretty that they want to have, but also try to encourage them. So we had I think it's around 750 color photos in there, including pollen grains and everything else. So,
wow.
Cool book. I had this up earlier. This is the books we're bringing back, what I'm calling the classic books. The Pollinator Protection by Dan Mayer and Carl Johansson. We brought back the Comb Honey Production book by Roger Morris. And then I've reprinted Roger Hubergarner's analysis of Langstroth's work, The Hive and the Honeybee Revisited. So that's pretty much it. We got a new one coming out on mating behavior here in a couple of weeks. And it's all pretty cool, very exciting. Shane, as usual, it's been delightful. The hour has flown by. And I didn't think I had enough material, but as usual, we've proven that to be wrong. So,
absolutely, and I want to thank you, Larry. It always is a pleasure speaking with you. Your wealth of knowledge, and it's great that we're able to do this and share that with folks. So I do appreciate it. I know time is tight. You're on the go, often speaking all over the country, and to take time out to meet with us is truly appreciated. Thank you so very much.
You know what takes time, Shane? It's the time to sit and think about some of these subjects, especially something like this. It took me days to come up with what I wanted to give, and I tried to make it simple because that's the best way to do it, they say, but not always easy. Thank you, Shane. Appreciate it very much, and I appreciate all the comments I get from folks that certainly would be interested in any topics or subjects that people think they'd like to hear something about in the future. So go to my website, wickwash.com. and check us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We appreciate it. Hope this has been informative to you, and look forward to the next time. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Night, Shane.
Good night.